Chapter 4. That night, after the castle had fallen silent to all but echoes, and the last log in the great hall had spat out its final ember, Queen Niobe sat beside the fire, beneath a mound of fragrant furs. A pavilion hung around her, a private bower, her fortress against the night. A kingdom whose borders she guarded with far more certainty than the one she ruled, where thick curtains and familiar scents kept both darkness and fear at arm's reach, as well as moths. But now the flames guttered, and with them their light. The shadows breached her sanctuary and gathered around her, pressing close, threatening to crush reason. And so she commanded herself to rise, as any queen must, to meet occasion come, to strive, to wrest life from ruin, and walked the empty corridors, barefooted and alone, seeking solace from fears ethereal and questions swallowed unanswered by swirling mists and shifting sands. And so it was that Queen Niobe found herself at the nursery. The three siblings still slept together in the same room, even though Teleos and Trophea had long since grown too old for such arrangements. But Trophis would not have it otherwise. And if he had had his way, it would likely have been the same bed. Tonight was such a night. Teleos slept straight-backed even in dreams. Trophea slept beautifully, which the queen found both touching and possibly politically useful if she could just find an artist who would not hum to wake her. Trophis had kicked off his blankets, embraced a wooden owl, and somehow acquired a smear of honey across one cheek, despite having been washed, inspected, and morally corrected less than an hour earlier. The queen looked at him longest. Then she began to cry. Not dramatically. Queens seldom have that luxury. Her tears arrived quietly, like servants using a side door, and left the same way. "I do not know how to save you," she whispered. And because desperation is amongst the oldest of languages, something heard her, though perhaps it would have been kinder if it had not. The curtains lifted, though no wind entered. And as the room leaned faintly towards itself, even gravity seemed briefly persuaded, the candle flames bending with it. And from the golden dark, beside Trophis's bed, stepped a small woman in travelling grey, a small step that had carried her far to where she needed to be. Her hair was the colour of moss, a shade requiring remarkably little upkeep and no highlights. Her eyes burned with a glance and cut with a glare. Fairy godmothers, contrary to theatre, rarely carried wands, for in their opinion anyone who has to point in order to feel persuasive has already lost the point. Older powers preferred smaller things of meaning, and so around her neck, for this evening, hung an acorn seemingly caught halfway between seed and crystal, jade in colour, from the Elder Grove Autumn Collection, favoured by creatures who regarded civilization as an unfortunate side effect of fire. The queen did not scream. As every mother, somewhere deep within herself, expects eventually to receive unwelcome guests, and her womanhood measured against them. "Who are you?" she commanded, her voice smooth and calm as ice, and just as fragile. The small woman looked towards the sleeping children. For a moment her face softened. "I was once a mother," she said, her voice as it should be, The queen understood at once that this was not truly an answer, or rather that it was the only one which mattered. "A fairy?" asked Queen Niobe. "A godmother," said the woman. "On those occasions when the world becomes too untidy to bear without intervention." The queen wiped her eyes quickly, ashamed to have been discovered in private humanity. "I did not summon you?" "No," said the fairy godmother. The queen stiffened then. "You pity me?" The fairy looked once more toward Trophis, who murmured something in his sleep about diplomatic pigeons and censored sparrows. "Not only you." For a while they stood together in silence, two mothers separated by the dimensions of their lives, yet closer than either would have wished, unable to protect what they loved, unable to protect anything forever. The fairy touched the acorn resting around her throat, and in time began to speak. "One wish," she said, "for the children." And as she said this, her eyes flickered from their slumbering forms to that of the queen, glaring. The queen's heart stopped, pierced. Outside, the moon Trophis had successfully rescued drifted peacefully above the palace roof. "One?" echoed the queen. "One," echoed the fae, amused that for once she was the follower. "For all of them?" The queen now grasping for reassurance in this deed. The fairy closed her eyes then and breathed deeply of the night, pondering, her expression altering by less than the passing of a shadow in an elder wood. All old powers possess moments in which they may still refuse, very small moments, almost invisible ones, moments upon which civilization builds momentum, and history later builds monuments and calls it fate. The fairy opened her eyes, pity in them now, or perhaps only understanding. "All of them," answered the fairy softly. Queen Niobe looked from Telios to Trophia to Trophis. For a moment, only as a mother. But Queen Niobe was a ruler, and rulers are trained early to distrust becoming. Becoming contains too many variables. She thought of weak kings, vain queens, foolish princes, wars born from appetite, dynasties rotted by indulgence, nations ruined because one child had grown crooked where he ought to have grown straight. And slowly she lifted her chin. Then, being a mother, the queen mistook fairness for love. And anything done in the name of love must surely be for the best. Emboldened by this, she made the wish. "I wish," said the queen, "for my children to be perfect." Now words, dear reader, are slippery things, and the fairy had learned long ago not to trust them. Yet still they bound her, and so she turned her gaze upon the queen and carefully cut intention from language. Well, fairly carefully, although she could not guarantee it would not leave a scar. And having seen the wish beneath the wish, gave her one final chance as a mother. "All," breathed the fairy in the queen's ear. "All of them," shuddered the queen. "Equally." "So be it," the fairy whispered before moving away. "As parents should always inflict their hopes," she said quietly, "equally upon their offspring." The fairy godmother lifted the crystalloid jade acorn from her throat and held it above the three sleeping children. For a moment the nursery filled with pale green light. Telios stirred. Trophia smiled. Trophis opened his eyes. He looked directly at the fairy and whispered, "Will it hurt?" The fairy godmother's hand trembled then. Her eyes widened as the fires within extinguished. "Yes," she said. And then, because pity is sometimes merely cruelty that has learned how to weep, the fires in her eyes burned brightly once more, as she granted the wish.
When castle fire and council fade, she walks the halls alone. She finds her children wrapped in dreams and fears to lose her own. A moss-haired mother leaves the dark one wish for all, says she. Then make them perfect everyone and mark them equally. Then green light blooms from crystal seed and cruelty gently weeps. For hope may seem a loving thing, but hope imposed is no such thing. It wounds what love would keep.